Okay, welcome to Witchpolice Radio. I'm here with a guest who's new to me on the podcast, but I've definitely seen your name and seen your music kind of floating around out there in the Manitoba and Winnipeg related internet over the past few years, and I really think that I waited too long to actually check it out because I checked it out fairly recently, and that's why I reached out because I really like it, and
Thank
I do have a lot of stuff I want to ask you about. But before we get into any of that, if you want to just introduce yourself and maybe give a bit of background about what it is you do as an artist.
Yeah. So I'm Cec Lopez. I grew up in Winnipeg, and just after high school, I went to university in the States for a couple years, and then I spent some time in Spain playing hockey. And I've been making music on and off since I was a kid, but I really got into it graduating from my undergrad, and now I'm here in Ottawa, pursuing a master's in music and culture.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
yeah, I make my own music. I write my own music. I produce almost all my own stuff. And yeah, so I'm a singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and a producer as well.
Cool. Do you? I know everyone hates this question, so I might as well start off with it. But how do you define what you do? And the reason everyone hates it is because I'm sure, as you know, there's so many subgenres of
Mhm.
this, that, and everything's. It's ridiculous. But do you have like a Cole's Notes short form way to define what it is?
Yeah, I actually really like the way you form the question because usually it's what kind of music do you make? But when you say how do you define what you do, it allows for a bit broader of an answer. I think most of my stuff has to do with heartbreak, unfortunately. But I make a lot of moody, kind of dreamy music, I would say. I'm constantly transitioning, I think, as a lot of artists are, based on what you're listening to at the time and what's going on in your life. But I started off and production capabilities and stuff like that. So I started off releasing a lot of folk and singer-songwriter stuff. I did a little bit of pop stuff recently. I was influenced by my time living in Spain, and I'm releasing a classical guitar
Oh,
centered
cool.
song coming up, and then I also have some kind of soul stuff on the horizon as well.
Well, I think all of those genres, I mean, especially something like soul and folk singer songwriter type vibes, they definitely lend themselves to songs about heartbreak. I mean, it seems like those genres are really tailor made for that kind of
Ab-
stuff, and that's one of those universal themes that I think works regardless of what type of music you're into.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I think grabbed me about your music as a listener was, and I don't know if this is a production thing or if this is something that you're doing intentionally or not, but the vocals, I mean, the vocals are great. You have a great voice and it really stands out. But in the recordings, especially on your Canola record, the vocals seem super present. Like it seems like they're right at the forefront of everything. And I've heard a lot of, especially with acoustic songs and things that are maybe more in the singer songwriter vein. A lot of the time that tends to get buried and softened in the mix, but your vocals are just right there, like front and center, and they're kind of commanding. Is that something that you did on purpose, or is that just sort of how it comes out of you?
I think it would probably be a mix. I don't have a whole lot of experience with mixing and production, but so it's probably a bit of that and my, recording it in my bedroom. But as well, I really find vocals important in my music and, when listening to other musicians as well. And so that's something I definitely did not want to get buried. And I've spent time in choirs and gospel choirs and children's choirs and to me, vocals are a really important piece of my music.
Well, I was going to ask about that too, is where that voice comes from, because I mean, production aside, it's very powerful, and you like it really stands out. Is that just from having all that experience in choirs?
I think it's probably a mix. Yeah, so lots of time in choirs, but I think my voice actually is a pretty blendy voice. I think it's a pretty soft voice that often um I'm not at the forefront of when I'm in choirs and stuff. I mean, which is kind of the point of a choir.
Yeah.
And I was in an a cappella group as well, so blending I've done a lot of work on that. But then when it's my music, I like to put a lot of layers of my own voice in it, so then that really it gets to stand out there.
When did you? I mean, what was the decision like? I guess to decide to start putting out your own music, because going from choirs where you're a large group of people and like you said, the voices blended with all these other voices, to then not only making yourself the focal point, but then singing about all of these heartbreaking things and this, very personal content. What was that like, making that choice to put yourself out there like that?
Yeah, it was definitely a slow process. I started writing my own music, I think right when I graduated high school or right near the end of high school. But I only showed it to a couple friends at the time. And I think honestly the hardest part of putting out your own music is the vulnerability, and not just with friends and strangers, but with family members. That's
Sure.
the hardest for me, is having like that wall that you have up with family members, and then having them kind of hear what's going on in your life kind of makes you shiver a little bit. Um, but I think that's really how I've learned to connect with people. And so it's been a slow process, but um, I've just kept pushing, chipping away at it little by little, and gotten to where I am now.
Has that become easier at all? That vulnerability, especially knowing, who's going to be listening to this?
Yeah, I think it has. I've worked with Luther Mallory, who's a performance coach, and he says, it's a risk reward or risk courage upward spiral that you need to create. And so, you take a little bit of risk, and then you get a little bit more courage with that. And then with that little bit of courage, you can do a little bit more risk. So I think it's really, I found it true.
Cool. What is the? Uh, I'm sick of talking about this, and I'm sure you are, and everyone is. But I have to ask about the pandemic. I've had everyone on the show, from metal bands to country singers to rappers to people making classical music, and everyone's experience over the past 2.5, 3 years has been pretty different, with the similarity that they haven't been able to do a lot of creative things in the public. As a solo artist, what was that like for you, having this kind of enforced time where, even if you wanted to play a show, that wasn't in the cards?
Right. So I think it's interesting because I'm still at the very start of my music career. And so I was just graduating from my undergrad when the pandemic started, and I wasn't performing live before
Okay.
that. Honestly, didn't really affect me a whole lot from a performance standpoint. I think it actually, so I went to Spain and I was working virtually, doing music and activism stuff with my choir director. We had this organization at Dartmouth to help students with their musical projects, but I was able to work virtually in music and make my own music um, during the pandemic. So I think it allowed me to have different opportunities that wouldn't have happened if we weren't isolated, or if I wasn't working virtually. So performance wise, I think it was a good amount of time that allowed me to make canola to be centered on that, and then come out of my cocoon kind of in the past year or so.
Just having that extra time to focus on it, and not have to worry about commuting and going out and doing other
Absolutely.
things. Yeah. What's You mentioned making canola, and I mean, it made me think you're actually making canola in a field. Obviously, you mean the record, but how important is having a sense of place in your music? Because I mean, canola to Manitobans, at least, you see that title, and you kind of,
Yeah,
there's an image there, right? Is that
absolutely.
a big part of what you do? Is having that, tying your music to a place and time?
Absolutely. Because I've lived in so many places and I've moved around quite a bit, I really wanted to make a record that was an ode to home, especially moving across the ocean alone in the pandemic. I definitely felt that tie that, all my friends, all my family are back in Manitoba, and I really wanted to do an ode to that and to them.
Do you think that this is a question I used to ask people all the time, and I kind of stopped a few years ago because I was getting the same answers. But I'm going to ask it again. Do you think that Manitoba, regardless of genre of music, or what someone's creating, but do you think there's a sound that sounds Manitoban? Like, is there something that you associate, as a listener, even with this part of the world?
I think it's funny because Winnipeg or Manitoba will pop up in the most random places. Like I'll find a book and then scroll through the book, and somewhere on the page that I decided to open, it says Winnipeg on the page. And I'm never expecting it, and it always surprises me, but there it is. And I think that's really true to Winnipeg and Manitoba, is that there's something special And even if it's not a distinct sound, I think I'm not surprised when I hear somebody I like and I see that they're from Manitoba or from Winnipeg or something, somebody's doing something cool, and I go, of course they're from Manitoba.
Well, you can't escape it, right? It just keeps showing up no matter where you go in the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the plan? I mean, like you said, you're getting more education related to music. What's sort of your plan once you're done that? Obviously, you want music to become a career, I assume.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really looking to um, build my production chops as well and produce for other artists other than myself. But right now, for the next 2 years, that's what I am working on my master's and studying queer temporality with musicology and just really interested in that. And while I'm at it, I'm just going to continue performing, continue putting out music.
Well, the production thing is interesting too because on some of your songs, I mean, there'll be that sort of traditional folk singer-songwriter elements, but then yeah, there's behind it is this kind of more modern, um, maybe
Mhm.
you could call it pop. I know you mentioned pop earlier, sort of production behind it, and so what do you feel is the benefit of sort of blending genres like that?
I think nowadays, because music is so accessible with streaming and so many different genres and types, I think there's hardly anyone that's going to be influenced by only one genre. And I think that is a really cool thing. And I think it allows for a lot of different mixes and different sounds to be able to come out. So I think that's really important in my music as well.
Are there artists that you maybe grew up listening to that did things like that, whether it's the same genres or not?
Yeah. Um, so I listened to a lot of 60s and 70s funk and soul growing
Okay.
up with my parents. And I was also folk and singer-songwriter. And then that kind of blended with um, when I started to discover contemporary music and pop in the 2010s there. And then like Spanish music. I think nowadays almost everything is blended with something. Um, and so lately I've been really influenced by artists like Charlotte Day Wilson and Daniel Caesar and Bad Bad Not Good. And then also still influenced by artists like Marvin Gaye and Al Green and then Joni Mitchell. So there's a whole lot of blend there that comes through in my music.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you said too about sort of the way that with streaming and everything's kind of combined and blended, it almost seems like now the sort of origin of music doesn't matter. People aren't necessarily listening to something and then like you used to, looking at the liner notes, finding out where it's recorded, what country it's from. It's just coming up and they're just listening to it and then just sort of absorbing all of these different influences without really seeking it out, right? Because it's all sort of thrown at you at once.
Right.
And I think that's going to generate interesting stuff regardless of where you are or how old you are or whatever.
Right. It might just be because I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to this, but I still think it's really important to know the origins
Oh,
and
it
keep.
totally is.
Yeah.
But just, I mean, I agree with you for 100%. I'm still like a dinosaur who listens to only physical music, but there definitely are kids now who are. I mean, I see it with my own kids that they're listening to stuff and they have no idea if it's from 30 years ago or from last week, and it's just all sort
Absolutely.
of presented on one plate, and everyone's just taking
Absolutely.
what they want from it.
Yeah, or people listening and it's a sample of a song from the 70s
Yeah,
and having no idea, but
and then they hear that song on like classic radio or something like 2 years later, and suddenly their brain explodes because they've recognized the sample.
yeah.
Um, I know you're not in Winnipeg now. Are you planning on making trips back to the city, sort of during your time getting your master's?
Yeah, for sure. I'll be back in March for about a week. I have a show and then I'll probably be back in May and then hopefully all the way until for the summer term.
Oh
So
yeah,
from May until August, I plan on being back in Winnipeg
cool.
and doing shows and yeah.
Well, one thing you mentioned earlier about using that time during the pandemic, it just occurred to me. How much time do you have now that you're doing your master's? Like, do you have time to work on follow up, or is that pretty much taken up exclusively with school?
a lot of time management skills
I
involved
bet.
in what I'm doing now because I'm also playing varsity hockey for the university. So there's a lot, but I really try to use the time. Like I used the summer really valuably because I knew that it was going to be taken up this year during the year. And so I've been able to release or just release a song and then hopefully release another one in the spring and then use my time this summer that I have been writing here, even though I haven't been able to produce a whole lot, I have been writing. So I have some stuff that I can record during the summer then.
Cool. Well, I know this is all fairly recent too. Like you said, the previous record was sort of done during the pandemic, but have you noticed since that's come out and since you've obviously had things change in your life with moving across the country and everything, um, have you noticed any kind of change or evolution in your own sound in your own writing?
Yeah, absolutely. When I released Canola, there was kind of like that was a moment where I felt everything change almost like a pre-canola and post-canola in my own music because that was kind of a moment where I was like, okay, I'm taking this a lot more seriously. Um and I've been a part of a lot of amazing programs since then. Like I this last year I was part of RBCX Music's First Up
Yeah.
program. And so we had an amazing time in Toronto. They flew us out and we did a lot of writing workshops and business workshops. So I've learned a lot over the past year, and that's definitely influenced my writing and I've become a lot more confident also in my own writing and honest.
Well, I guess getting that kind of recognition too is got to help with the confidence. Just the fact that you were part of that.
Absolutely. And especially because music and any career in the arts is full of self-doubt and especially as a young artist and as an independent artist, it's just full of self-doubt, so it's really important congratulating yourself for those milestones and recognizing, if this is what I feel like I'm meant to do, then this is what I'm meant to do.
Yeah, and actually taking that and running with it too.
Yeah.
You mentioned a few minutes ago the learning about the business side of it as well, and I mean that's kind of the boring part of it. But I know there's a lot of people who have had a hard time transitioning from being strictly an artist and now having to be an artist, and you have to be your own PR person, and you have to do
Mhm.
social media, and you have to do all of this. What has that part of it been like for you? Because again, you're relatively new at this, and so you've kind of coming into a time when this is expected of everyone to be able to handle that side of things as well as just the creativity.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely not for the faint of heart. Like, if you want to have a career in music, you are going to have to learn the business side and you're going to have to be your own promoter, your own manager, at least until you're big enough for somebody to do that for you. And so I think there was a lot of like I wasn't sure at all about the music industry when I started, as a lot of people aren't, but in the past year I've learned a lot, I've met a lot of amazing people, and there are people out there that want to help you, and if you're willing to learn, that it's really you get out of it what you put into it
Sure.
type of career.
And what kind of, I mean, what kind of things did you learn at that when you were in Toronto about that? Like, how does someone teach someone sort of how to do that part? Because a lot of it is really just kind of, you just learn it on the go, right? Especially with things like social media, you kind of figure out what works, what doesn't.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the main takeaway was people want to see who you genuinely are. And if you are losing yourself, or if you like, it's always important to remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing and why you started. And so that's something that you should always come back to because people can tell if you're fake.
Yeah.
And people want to know who you are, and people want to see the genuine you. So I think that's the most important thing.
Well, I'm glad you said that because one of the topics that comes up all the time on this show is people, specifically in Manitoba, but I think everywhere, having a really good bullshit detector, especially now, and being able to tell when someone is just trying to sell themselves rather than being themselves, and using that as a way to promote themselves.
Yeah, yeah. It's so important, and it's important for your own health as well. Like if you don't know who you are, then it's really hard to show that to other people. And it's really hard to connect with other people.
For sure, yeah, and that's what you have to do now. I mean, you always had to as a musician connect with other people, but now it's way more direct and more almost one on one with fans because you have that
Mhm.
online connection.
Exactly.
At this point, what's the best way for someone to check out your music? I know you're not playing any shows in the really near future here in Winnipeg, but if someone wants to hear your stuff or even follow you online and see what you're up to as far as potential shows and things like that.
Yeah. So I'm on all of the streaming platforms that anyone gets their music from. You can also find my stuff on Bandcamp, which is a great way to support artists. And I do have physical CDs where I'm on Instagram and TikTok as well. So if anybody wants to uh, get a hold of CDs, they can message me on there. If you, I can give you my email as well if you want to. I don't know if you put it in these
Sure, I
things,
can do that. Yeah, go for it.
but I can send that as well. So anyone can always shoot me a message, and I'm happy to respond. And then I'm on YouTube as well. So pretty much anywhere that you get your music. I'm hoping, I don't have a whole lot of stuff out. So I did make CDs with the EP that I did release, but right now I'm just putting out singles. So.
Cool, cool.